I poured my soul into every late night, every early morning. I built his dreams while mine quietly waited on hold. I celebrated his wins louder than my own. I stayed when he pushed me to the edge. I forgave what should have ended everything. I covered for him when he lied to everyone I trusted. I kept my dignity while he slowly chipped away at mine. I whispered hope when he only shouted doubt. I sacrificed pieces of myself he'd never notice. And then, he chose someone else like I was nothing. My name is Emma. I was 32, living in Chicago, working as a marketing strategist at a mid-sized tech firm. I had spent the better part of a decade building a life with someone I believed was my partner, my equal, my home. We had been together for 7 years. Long enough to know each other's routines, long enough for him to know the weight of my loyalty. At first, the imbalance was subtle. He missed my birthday, forgot small promises, shrugged off the little things that used to matter to me. But I learned to overlook them. I rationalized. I told myself love meant patience, that loyalty meant endurance. I became the silent partner, the one who carried more, said less, and smiled through the cracks of exhaustion. The first undeniable betrayal wasn't obvious. It came as a text I stumbled upon while he left his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. The words burned themselves into my chest. Flirty, intimate, dismissive of the life we had built. I froze. My hands shook. My mind raced through years of devotion, every sacrifice, every compromise, every moment I thought we were a team, and realized that in his eyes I was invisible. I didn't confront him immediately. I watched quietly, cataloging the evidence, counting the moments he slipped, the truths he tried to hide. The confrontation I imagined in my mind wasn't a scene from a movie. It was cold, precise, controlled. I wanted him to see that I wasn't reacting out of anger. I was reacting out of clarity. When the night came, I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I simply handed him the phone, laid out every message, every interaction, and waited. He tried to twist it, minimize it, make it seem accidental. But his excuses crumbled like dry leaves. For the first time, I realized my voice didn't need to fight. My silence would speak volumes. After that night, everything shifted. I stopped begging for attention, for acknowledgement, for love that wasn't coming. I stopped over-explaining myself. I stopped showing up for someone who had already checked out emotionally. The world seemed suddenly sharper, clearer, as if I had been wearing foggy glasses my entire life. I started investing in myself in ways I had neglected for years. I reconnected with friends I had drifted from, pursued projects I had abandoned, and slowly, meticulously, rebuilt a life that wasn't tethered to his validation. He watched, confused, as I stopped seeking permission to be happy. The balance of power subtly shifted, almost imperceptibly, but it was there. I no longer sought to fix him. I sought to strengthen myself. Evenings became mine. I filled them with books, with walks in the quiet parks near my apartment, with laughter that wasn't forced. He would reach out, sometimes guiltily, sometimes defensively, trying to reclaim the influence he had lost. But I didn't answer immediately. I didn't react theatrically. I allowed the absence of my reaction to speak for me. Silence became my language of dignity. I watched him lose control over the narrative we had once shared. Friends and colleagues began to notice the shift, the quiet confidence I had cultivated. The same people who had excused his flippant disregard for me now saw me thriving without him. And slowly, the whispers and sideways glances revealed what I had known all along. The real power had never been his to wield. I had simply allowed him to think it was. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. There were no schemes, no public shaming, no dramatic confrontations at dinner parties. It was subtler, harder. I had built a life worth noticing, a life he could no longer influence, a life he had underestimated. Every step I took away from him was a step toward reclaiming my identity, my self-respect, and my voice. Weeks turned into months. He lingered in the background like a shadow of what I once trusted, sending half-hearted apologies, asking for casual meetups, hoping I'd slip back into the rhythm I had abandoned. But I didn't. I was no longer the one who would carry the weight of his choices. I had learned to carry my own. I immersed myself in work, but not out of avoidance, out of purpose. I spearheaded a campaign at my firm that had been stuck for months, pouring creativity and strategy into it late into the nights. I invited feedback from colleagues who had always respected my mind but rarely saw my leadership. The project became a quiet triumph. My name appeared in newsletters, in client meetings, in casual office conversations. Each acknowledgement was a small, unspoken victory. Socially, I changed too. Friends who had long felt secondary to his whims now had my full attention. I laughed without restraint. I traveled with them. I hosted dinners that were intimate, lively, and entirely mine. I watched as he tried to intrude, sending messages, tagging me in memories, hoping to provoke guilt. I didn't respond. I smiled at my freedom instead. The real shift came when I realized how little I needed him to feel whole. It was subtle at first, a flicker of joy while reading alone on the balcony, the rush of satisfaction after a late-night brainstorming session, the warmth of a friend's unexpected compliment. Those moments built into something formidable, a quiet authority over my own life. He could no longer dictate my mood, my plans, or my self-worth. He had lost access without ever realizing the scale of what he surrendered. He eventually tried a more calculated approach. He invited me to a dinner, public, neutral, to talk things through. I considered it for a heartbeat, imagining confrontation scenes, apologies, drama. But when I arrived, I didn't play the part he expected. I was polite, calm, composed. I shared updates about work, about friends, about plans that excluded him entirely. I let the silence between sentences grow. I let him squirm under the weight of a dignity he couldn't touch. The illusion of control he thought he had dissolved in real time. It wasn't cruelty, it was reclaiming what I had earned. I never humiliated him publicly. I never needed to. My presence, thriving and unbothered, became the statement. Those who knew us both began noticing the change. The confident strides, the self-assured laughter, the subtle reminders that I had rebuilt my world without him. Internally, the revenge was sweeter than any confrontation could have been. Every time I walked into a room knowing my voice, my ideas, my energy commanded attention without him, I felt the finality of my emancipation. Every attempt he made to re-enter my life was met with composed indifference. My silence had become armor. My dignity had become leverage. And in the quiet I realized something profound. I had never been powerless. I had simply needed to stop granting him authority over my existence. He finally stopped reaching out altogether. I didn't gloat, I didn't celebrate. I continued to live, deeply and intentionally, each day a testament to the respect I owed myself. People asked if I felt revenge, if I ever wanted to confront, to lash out, to expose. I would smile quietly, knowing that the truest revenge had no noise. It was the life I built, the relationships I nurtured, the confidence I reclaimed, all without his interference. By the end of that year I had changed completely. I had invested in passions I'd long ignored, traveled to cities I'd always dreamed of, met mentors who believed in my worth, and felt a sense of completeness that hadn't existed while I defined myself by his presence. He had torn away what he assumed was control, but in doing so, he left me unshackled. He had been the catalyst, but I had been the architect of my new life. By the time he realized I had truly moved on, it was too late. He reached out once more, this time with what I can only describe as desperation disguised as charm. But I had nothing to give. I answered politely, the way one might respond to a stranger who happens to know your past. The intimacy, the access, the influence he once wielded, all gone. I held my boundaries firmly, and in that moment the final line had been drawn. People around us began noticing the transformation. Friends who had silently endured his behavior expressed relief, admiration, even awe. Colleagues treated me differently, not because I sought their validation, but because they could see the confidence radiating from someone who had reclaimed herself. It wasn't revenge in the way movies show it. It was subtler, slower, and far more powerful. The power imbalance had shifted quietly but irreversibly. He was no longer in a position to affect my life. His attempts to insert himself back in were met with calm, unyielding silence. The most satisfying moments were never dramatic. It was in the small, everyday victories. Speaking my mind without hesitation, laughing freely with friends, choosing opportunities that aligned with my values, and sleeping peacefully at night without fear of betrayal creeping back into my dreams. Every success, every new connection, every recognition of my abilities was a quiet echo of the life I had allowed myself to reclaim. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The revenge I had orchestrated through dignity and self-respect was already complete. He had lost access, control, and influence, and the realization of it sat quietly in my favor. The people who mattered, the friends, mentors, and colleagues who had supported me, saw the real transformation, and that was enough. Over time, I discovered a sense of peace I had never known. Not the flashy, vindictive peace that comes from seeing someone suffer, but the grounded, enduring peace of knowing I had honored my own worth. I had taken my pain and turned it into power. My self-respect had become unshakable, and I had learned that boundaries, once set and enforced, are the truest form of protection against betrayal. I often think about him now, not with anger but with clarity. I see how fragile control is when it's built on someone else's submission. I see how easily influence slips through fingers that never held it in the first place. I no longer need to dwell on the betrayal itself. I only need to remember what I gained: freedom, dignity, and an unwavering sense of self. I carry that lesson forward in everything I do. I no longer let loyalty be mistaken for weakness. I no longer allow my kindness to be a door for someone else's selfishness. I learned that the quietest victories are often the most profound, that rebuilding yourself after betrayal is its own form of justice, and that peace doesn't need applause, it needs consistency, clarity, and courage. Looking back, I realized the true revenge wasn't in exposing him, shaming him, or even making him feel regret. The true revenge was reclaiming my life in full, silent, irreversible motion. Every step I took away from him was a step toward myself, toward a life that reflected my values and honored my worth. And in that, I found something he could never touch: me.